is a moment, and perhaps you have lived it many times, when you sit down at the end of a long day and realize that your mind has been running since before your eyes opened that morning. Not running toward anything beautiful or necessary, just running, spinning through possibilities that never arrived, rehearsing conversations that never happened, building entire architectures of worry out of nothing more than a passing thought. You are exhausted, but not from the world. You are exhausted from yourself, from the relentless narration that follows you everywhere, that turns a simple cup of tea into an occasion for analysis, that transforms a quiet walk into a battlefield of inner commentary. This is what the Buddhist tradition calls papanka, mental proliferation. The mind's compulsive habit of taking one simple moment and weaving it into 1,000 stories, 1,000 futures, 1,000 fears. This video is for you if you have ever felt more tired inside your head than inside your body. It is for you if you have sat in a beautiful place and barely seen it because your thoughts were louder than the wind. It is for the version of you that knows, somewhere deep and quiet, that there is another way to move through this life. A way that does not require more analysis, more planning, more figuring out. A way that asks only one thing of you, and that one thing is to see. To continue healing your body and soul through these ancient teachings, I invite you to join our path by subscribing to this sanctuary. What is offered here is not distraction or entertainment. It is a slow and gentle returning to the clarity that has always lived inside you, beneath the noise. The first insight is this: thinking is not the same as understanding. We live in a civilization that has made a religion out of the mind. We are told from childhood that the answer to every problem is more thought, more analysis, more information. And so we think. We think about our relationships until they become complicated. We think about our purpose until it becomes paralyzed. We think about our happiness until it disappears entirely. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki once said that in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. The expert's mind is the thinking mind, the mind so full of conclusions that it cannot receive anything new. It walks into a forest and sees only the names of trees. The beginner's mind and the seeing mind walks into the same forest and is overwhelmed by the aliveness of it, every leaf trembling with its own particular light, every shadow holding its own depth. Understanding, true understanding, does not arrive through more thinking. It arrives through a quality of presence so complete that the boundary between you and what you are seeing begins to dissolve. The second insight is that you have been taught to distrust your senses. Somewhere along the path of your education, you were given the message that what you feel in your body, what you perceive through your eyes and ears and skin, is less reliable than what your rational mind concludes. And so you stopped trusting the feeling of wrongness that moved through your chest when a decision did not align with your values. You stopped trusting the sudden and inexplicable sense of peace that came to you in certain places and around certain people. You stopped trusting the way your shoulders would tighten long before your mind had words for the stress it was carrying. The body sees what the mind argues with. And the invitation of this ancient wisdom is to begin returning to the body as a site of knowledge, not sentiment, not irrationality, but genuine, lived, immediate knowing. When you sit in stillness and feel the weight of your hands in your lap, that is not nothing. That is a profound act of perception. That is the first movement of seeing. The third insight arrives from a simple story told in a monastery high in the mountains of Japan. A young monk came to his teacher and said, "Master, I have been meditating for 3 years, and I still cannot quiet my mind. My thoughts are like a river in flood." The teacher did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "Show me your flooded river." The monk looked confused. He said, "I cannot show you my thoughts, master. They are inside me." The teacher nodded slowly and said, "Yes, and where are you?" The monk fell silent, because in that silence he began to understand something that no amount of thinking could have delivered. He had been identifying so completely with the thoughts, so thoroughly convinced that he was the river, that he had forgotten entirely that he was also the sky through which the river's mist arose, the ground through which the river ran, the stillness that held the sound of rushing water from a distance. This is the third insight. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear. And awareness does not think. Awareness sees. The fourth insight is about time, and how thinking keeps you prisoner in a duration that does not exist. When you are lost in thought, you are almost never here. You are in the past, replaying what was said or done, rehearsing what you should have said instead. Or you are in the future, constructing scenarios, anticipating outcomes, bracing for disappointments that exist only as possibilities. The present moment, the only moment that is ever actually real, sits waiting for you like a quiet room that no one enters. And here is what seeing offers that thinking never can. Seeing is always now. You cannot see yesterday. You cannot see tomorrow. When you truly look at anything, at the grain of wood on a table, at the particular way afternoon light falls across a floor, at the small and perfect world inside a single breath, you are returned instantly and completely to this moment. This is why contemplative traditions across centuries and cultures have used the practice of directed attention as a portal. Not because looking at a candle flame or a stone is mystical in itself, but because genuine seeing collapses the distance between you and now. The fifth insight is that the inner narrator is not your friend, though it pretends to be. That voice in your head, the one that comments on everything, that judges, compares, worries, and explains, that voice arrived very early in your life as a survival mechanism. It was learning to anticipate danger, to rehearse social situations, to protect you from pain. It did its job, and then it never stopped. Like a security guard who became so convinced of constant threat that they could not take off the uniform even on a Sunday morning at the kitchen table with coffee and sunlight, and nothing wrong. The narrator keeps narrating long after the story has ended, and its constant commentary creates a kind of fog between you and your direct experience. You are never quite tasting the food because you are thinking about whether you like it. You are never quite hearing the music because you are evaluating it. You are never quite present with the person in front of you because you are composing your response before they have finished speaking. The fifth insight is simply this: every moment the narrator falls quiet, even for a single breath. Something enormous opens, a space of pure reception, a silence that is not empty but full of the actual texture of being alive. Pause here for just a moment. Let your eyes soften. Let your jaw release whatever it is holding. Take one breath that is not a task, not a discipline, but simply an event that you attend with your whole body. Notice the sensation of air moving in through the nostrils, cool and thin. Notice the slight expansion of the chest and belly. Notice the pause at the top of the breath, that small and holy suspension before the exhale begins. And notice the exhale, warmer now, slower, the body releasing something it no longer needs. You just did something the thinking mind cannot do. You were fully present. You saw, with the inner eye of sensation, the entire arc of one breath. That is the practice. That is what less thinking, more seeing means when it is lived rather than explained. The sixth insight is that nature has always known how to teach this, if we are willing to be students of the visible world. There is a reason that human beings throughout all of history have gone to mountains, to rivers, to forests and oceans, when the weight of their inner life became too heavy to carry. It is not escape, it is education. The mountain does not plan its day. The river does not rehearse what it will say to the sea. The tree does not spend autumn worrying about winter. These are not metaphors for passivity. They are demonstrations of a different kind of intelligence, an intelligence that responds fully and immediately to what is, without the overlay of what was or what might be. When you walk slowly through a forest and you stop, truly stop, and look at the underside of a single leaf, you are receiving a teaching that has been offered to every human being who has ever been willing to receive it. The teaching is this: reality is infinitely richer than your concepts of it. The leaf is not merely a leaf. It is a map of light and water and time and biology and impermanence and beauty, and the particular way this morning's rain has left small transparent spheres along its edges. Your thinking mind would process this in half a second and move on. Your seeing mind could spend a lifetime in a single leaf and never arrive at the end of its wonder. The seventh insight concerns what happens to relationships when we move from thinking to seeing. We have been conditioned to relate to people primarily through our concepts of them. We build a mental model of the person we love, or the colleague we struggle with, or the parent who complicated our childhood, and then we relate almost entirely to that model rather than to the living, changing, irreducible person who stands before us. This is why long marriages can become strangers to each other while sharing the same bed. Not because love died, but because seeing stopped. The husband stopped seeing his wife and started relating to his idea of her. The wife stopped seeing her husband and started responding to her accumulated story about him. Anicca, the Buddhist teaching of impermanence, tells us that nothing remains the same from one moment to the next. Not the river, not the mountain, not the person you married, not you. When you bring genuine seeing into a relationship, you arrive as if for the first time. You notice the small sadness behind your friend's smile. You notice the way your child's hands have changed since last month. You notice that the person you had written off as difficult is, in this particular moment, doing something unexpectedly tender. Seeing is the most profound act of love we can offer another human being. It says, I am not relating to my story about you. I am here, with you, now. The eighth insight is about what meditation truly is, stripped of all its cultural packaging and spiritual branding. At its core, meditation is training in seeing. It is the deliberate practice of setting down the narrator and learning to inhabit the field of direct perception. When you sit quietly and follow your breath, you are not trying to stop thinking. You are practicing something far simpler and far more radical. You are practicing noticing. You notice a thought has arisen. You see it. You do not follow it into its story. You return to the breath. Another thought arises. You see it, you return. This practice, repeated thousands of times over weeks and months and years, does something extraordinary. It creates a gap, a space between experience and reaction, between stimulus and response, between what happens and the story you tell yourself about what happened. In that gap lives freedom, not the abstract freedom of philosophy, but the immediate embodied freedom of a human being who is no longer completely controlled by the momentum of their own mental habits. A human being who can, in the middle of an argument, actually see the pain in the other person's face and choose compassion over retaliation. A human being who can, in the middle of fear, actually feel the ground beneath their feet and remember that they are held. This is what seeing gives you that thinking never can. It gives you the present moment as a place you can actually live. The ninth insight is perhaps the most difficult to receive because it asks something of the identity you have built so carefully over a lifetime. The insight is this: the self that thinks so constantly and so urgently is not the entirety of what you are. It is a process, a habit, a very useful and very limited function that arose to help you navigate the social and physical world. But beneath that function, prior to it, larger than it, there is an awareness that does not think, that simply and quietly is. The Buddhist teaching of anatta, non-self, is often misunderstood as a kind of nihilism, a suggestion that you do not exist. But this is not what it points to. It points to something far more interesting and far more liberating. It suggests that the small, separate, anxious self that your thinking mind constructs moment to moment is not the final truth of what you are. That there is a dimension of your being that is not worried, not separate, not in need of more analysis. A dimension that is already at peace, not because it has resolved all problems, but because it is prior to the very machinery that creates the experience of being a problem in need of solution. When you move from thinking to seeing, you begin to touch this dimension, not as a concept, as an experience, as the living reality of a moment in which you are fully here and fully whole, and the question of whether you are enough simply does not arise, because the one who asks that question has temporarily stepped aside. This is the journey that the ancient ones mapped for us, not a journey outward to better circumstances or greater achievements, not a journey to a future version of yourself who has finally figured everything out, a journey inward and downward, below the surface of the thinking mind, into the quiet ground of being that has been here, unchanging and undisturbed, through every storm your life has ever produced. The monk in his mountain monastery and the parent in the chaos of a morning kitchen are practicing the same thing when they remember to see. The meditator on a cushion and the office worker who pauses for 3 seconds before responding to a frustrating email are touching the same wisdom. It is not a wisdom reserved for the few. It is a wisdom that is available in any moment that you choose direct perception over habitual narration. You do not need to retreat to a monastery. You do not need years of practice before you qualify. You do not need to be calm already in order to begin. You need only this: one moment of genuine seeing, the color of the sky through your window right now, the temperature of the air on your skin, the sound of the world continuing to exist while you pause inside it. These small acts of direct perception are not preliminary steps towards some greater spiritual achievement. They are the achievement. They are the practice and the fruit of the practice simultaneously. They are moments in which the exhausting project of maintaining a separate, worried, narrating self simply rests. And in that resting, something ancient and trustworthy rises, like light through water, like silence after rain. There is a quality of life available to you that thinking alone cannot reach, not a life without difficulty or uncertainty, not a life above the human experience of grief and longing and confusion, but a life in which those experiences move through an open space rather than a clenched one. A life in which you can be sad without being destroyed, uncertain without being paralyzed, imperfect without being condemned. This quality of life is what the tradition calls awakening, not a dramatic cosmic event, but the ordinary, continuous, patient practice of choosing to see what is actually here rather than what your mind insists on telling you is here. Less thinking, more seeing, not as a command, not as a self-improvement project, but as a gentle, daily returning to the only moment you have ever actually lived, which is this one, exactly as it is, asking nothing more of you than your honest, open, unhurried attention. May you find rest beneath your thoughts. May you discover the vast and quiet awareness that you have always been. May your seeing grow clearer with each breath. And may this path, walked in patience and in kindness toward yourself, bring you home